You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 2.
Far, far away from North Korea lay the beautiful, 100% non-nuclear islands of Vaile. Located between Fiji and Vanuatu and surrounded by the crystal blue waters of the Pacific Ocean, the Vaile Islands were a lush, coconut-laden tropical paradise and home to several 100,000 people who had never lived anywhere else and didn't want to. And who could blame them? The islanders lived at about half the speed of the Western world and were twice as happy. They had all the modern conveniences they wanted and none of the stress. Their political system was democratic and stable, and their lives were long, happy, and peaceful. The Vaile Islands were properly called the Kingdom of the Vaile Islands because the archipelago had a king, a queen, and a young prince who was the sole heir to his father's throne. The royal family was descended from a long line of islander kings and queens whose time on the throne was only interrupted in the 1800s when the British dropped anchor in one of Vavou's many beautiful harbors and declared the little nation a colony of Her Majesty the Queen of England. The locals liked the newcomers about as much as they liked to boil on their backsides, but the relationship improved markedly when England decided to return the islands to the rightful rulers. But the British retained a small outpost on the islands, and over time the two nations developed a close friendship. These days the royal family left the lawmaking to the Parliament of Vaile and instead spent most of their time attending official dinners with ambassadors from around the world and the occasional movie star. Prince Laheeti was 14 years old and the image of this father, the king, at the same age. That concerned Laheeti a little bit because his father was now an overweight man with a receding hairline, which might mean that Laheeti was destined to look the same way when he grew old. But Laheeti wasn't a worrier, and it was certainly true that he had nothing to worry about. Tall, slim, and athletic, he had short black hair, brown skin, and a smile that would one day melt the hearts of young ladies the world over. Being a prince and rich would also help in that department. Laheeti's best friends were Twigger, who was a local islander boy, and Isabelle O'Donnell, a girl from London. The first time he met Isabelle, they hadn't gotten along. Maybe it was because they came from completely different backgrounds. She, a blue-eyed, blonde-haired 14-year-old British girl, and he, a prince from a tropical paradise. Or perhaps it had more to do with the fact that when she met him, she accused him of being a fake prince. Whatever the reason, it was a rocky start, but after working together with Twigger to stop 3 British thieves from stealing the royal crown of Vaile, they all became best friends. The only problem was that Isabelle lived in England, and the only time she came to Vaile was when she visited her father, who worked at a hotel on the main island. The last time they all teamed up, they traveled to Japan to watch Gulbenkian compete in an international sumo wrestling competition. They also helped the Silver Shinobi and a dwarf police SWAT team capture the British thieves who originally tried to steal the royal crown of Vaile. Gulbenkian saved Laheeti's life during that trip to Japan, and even though that was part of the royal bodyguard's job description, Laheeti would always be grateful. Gulbenkian was perfectly suited to protecting the young prince. At 2.5 meters tall and massively built, the giant islander was possibly the strongest man in the world. That was why he beat all the other competitors and won the international sumo wrestling competition. But the most remarkable thing about Gulbenkian was not his immense size but his endearing shyness. Despite his awesome strength and power, he was the least pushy person that Laheeti had ever met. He was as meek as a mouse, and he even stuttered when he spoke. It was true that the giant islander looked dangerous, but he didn't really seem to have the right personality to be a bodyguard. But a long time ago, Laheeti learned something about Gulbenkian that he would never forget. There was a darker side to the giant islander's personality. Whenever he was required to use his awesome strength, something about him changed. It was a subtle change, but it always meant the bad guys were about to end up on their heads. It was a simple rule, and Laheeti knew it well. When Gulbenkian speaks without a stutter, that's when he's dangerous. On a hot summer's day, Laheeti, Isabelle, and Twigger were at the National Zoo of Vaile. "This is the 6th birdcage we've seen so far," Laheeti said, standing in front of a large enclosure. "Don't get me wrong, I like birds, especially tropical ones with all the bright colors, but this zoo has a lot more than just birds, right?" Isabelle fanned herself with a folded map of the zoo and glanced at the other members of the group. Twigger was dressed down in an old t-shirt, shorts, and a pair of blue thongs. He always wore the same things, and Isabelle wondered if he actually had any other clothes. Standing beside Twigger was an athletic-looking man wearing a khaki shirt and shorts and rugged hiking boots splattered with brown mud. They'd met him an hour ago and his name was Tom Burnmaster. His clothes fitted the job title. Chief zoologist at the Vavu Zoo. Isabelle figured Burnmaster was in his mid-30s. He had broad shoulders, blue eyes, a deeply tanned face, and a South African accent. There was no doubt he was the outdoors type, and Isabelle wondered if he had been a hunter back in his home country. The National Zoo of Vavu was a huge facility set among the tropical jungles of the island. There were hundreds of species of animals on display in enclosures linked together by a maze of stone pathways. The whole experience was very Jurassic, and the zoo was a major tourist attraction for the island. Burnmaster grinned at the young prince's exasperation. "We've got a lot of animals here. What did you have in mind?" he asked. "How about monkeys?" said Laheeti. "Do you have monkeys?" "We sure do," replied Burnmaster, "and chimpanzees and gorillas." A reasonably complete collection of primates, in fact. Burnmaster turned to Isabelle and Twigger. "What do you guys want to see?" "Ahem," Laheeti said, pretending to clear his throat. "I'm the prince, so I get to choose what we see." "Whatever," Isabelle replied dismissively. "This is not an official visit to the zoo, so you're not officially the prince here. That means Twig and me get to choose what to see as well." "Are you kidding?" replied Laheeti. "Official visit or not, I am always the prince. You can't pause being a prince, you know." Burnmaster laughed and directed them along the pathway towards the monkey enclosures. Gulbenkian went first, his giant frame brushing aside limp tree branches that drooped low over the path in the tropical heat. The 14-year-olds and Burnmaster followed a couple of paces behind. Not many of the tourists at the zoo recognized the young prince, but they all stared at Gulbenkian because of his size. "Most monkeys are smaller than humans, you know," Burnmaster explained. "Except for gorillas, chimpanzees are smaller than humans, right?" asked Twigger. Burnmaster nodded. "So how come they are 4 times as strong as humans?" Twigger asked. "What? Chimps are 4 times as strong as humans?" Isabelle interrupted. "I don't believe it, they're not big enough." "Believe it," replied Burnmaster. "The last thing you want to do is get in a fight with a chimpanzee." "So you're saying a chimp is stronger than Gulbenkian?" Isabelle asked skeptically. "The other last thing you want to do is get in a fight with Gull." Twig looked up at Burnmaster. "How come there's such a big difference between chimps and humans when 98% of our DNA is the same?" Burnmaster looked impressed. "You've been studying. You're right, over 98% of our DNA is the same as chimpanzee DNA. But clearly that other 2% makes a big difference in the way we look and how intelligent we are." "What about gorillas and humans?" asked Laheeti. "Gorillas and humans share almost as much DNA as chimps and humans," replied Burnmaster. "But there's no doubt that chimps are our closest cousins. So if you combine the DNA of a gorilla and a human, would you get a chimp?" asked Isabelle. "It doesn't work like that," answered Burnmaster. "Humans, chimps, and gorillas are all separate species, and if somebody was crazy enough to combine their DNA, I don't know what you'd end up with. Something pretty unnatural, that's for sure." Isabelle nodded in agreement. "That would be totally wrong. Most countries have laws to prohibit scientists from conducting experiments like that," said Burnmaster. "Which is good because the last thing the world needs is a new, weird species of half-human, half-monkey running around." "I agree," said Isabelle, "and by the sounds of it, it wouldn't be very cute either." Twigger sniggered. "Because the ultimate measure of an animal's worth is how cute it is, right? If it's on display in a zoo it is," Isabelle retorted. Up ahead, Gulbenkian pushed a green leafy branch aside to read a sign. "I think we're there," he stammered. They came to a series of large cages shaded by tall trees. Isabelle was glad to get out of the sun and took the opportunity to sip from her water bottle as she peered inside each of the enclosures. The first monkeys they saw were of the small and cute variety. There were plaques detailing what kind of monkeys were living in the cages, but the information was unnecessary because Burnmaster could explain everything. There were marmosets, tamarins, capuchins, and langurs. Many of the monkeys were no larger than the palm of Isabelle's hand and jumped around the cage with quick movements. It had been a while since Isabelle had been to a zoo, and she'd forgotten how fast they could move. Twigger tried to touch one of them, but it sprang back and regarded him suspiciously with its little black eyes. After Burnmaster had answered all of their questions, they moved on to the larger enclosures. The bigger the monkeys became, the further away the visitors were from the cages. A little monkey might be able to steal a person's watch from her wrist, but a gorilla would just take the whole arm. It took Isabelle a moment to see the gorilla lying motionless in the shade in the enclosure. Its massive head was turned away, but she knew the animal was awake when one huge black hand lifted up and lazily swatted at a fly that landed on the gorilla's face. Then the head turned slowly towards the crowd of onlookers and yawned, displaying an enormous mouth with two pairs of wicked fangs. Looking bored, it rolled its head away and went back to sleep. "This one's a silverback gorilla," explained Burnmaster, the alpha male of the species. "See how he's got silver fur on his back going all the way down his rump?" The 14-year-olds nodded. "Silverbacks are bigger, stronger, and more aggressive than the other males in the species, and more dangerous. That's why there's a fence and a moat between him and us, not that he moves around very much. Gorillas in the wild sleep about 14 hours a day, and I reckon this one sleeps at least that much." "Did you see its teeth when it yawned?" asked Twigger. "Straight out of a vampire movie. He needs fangs like that to survive in the animal world," Burnmaster said. "Not that they were much use against poachers and their guns. I helped capture him about 3 years ago in Africa after he'd been injured by some poachers." "You mean the hunters in Africa that kill animals so they can cut them up and sell their bits," said Twig. "Like elephants get killed for their tusks and leopards get killed for their skins," Burnmaster nodded. "Right, gorillas get killed for their hands, feet, and some of their organs. People think they make good medicine. This big fella had bullet wounds in his leg and shoulder, but somehow he'd managed to escape. His family probably wasn't so lucky, the poachers probably got them. When I found him, he was alone, frightened, and fighting mad. Let me tell you, there's nothing scarier than a silverback on the warpath." Isabelle believed every word Burnmaster said, but it was hard to imagine the sleeping behemoth on the far side of the moat doing anything other than swatting flies and scratching its big silver backside, which, as the South African zoologist was telling his story, was precisely what the creature did. "Anyway," Burnmaster continued, "we managed to take him down without hurting him or us. Then we nursed him back to health and brought him to Vavu. There was initially some talk of returning him to Africa, but with the numbers of gorillas in the wild falling so fast, the decision was made to keep him here." "I figure he's done pretty well for himself, then," Isabelle suggested. Burnmaster shrugged. "He has all of his needs met here in the zoo, but he's not free anymore," he said. "If you could ask him what he wants to do, I bet he'd say he'd rather go back to the jungles of Africa." Just then, a neatly dressed young man wearing a purple shirt with a National Zoo of Vavu logo on it politely interrupted Burnmaster and handed him a parcel that was marked urgent in red letters on one side. Burnmaster thanked the staff member and turned the parcel over in his hands curiously, a slight frown creasing his suntanned features. The parcel was a little larger than a postcard, with a hard bulge in the middle. Pulling out a penknife from his pocket, he neatly sliced off the end of the parcel while Isabelle and Laheeti looked on with interest. "Do you regularly get parcels marked urgent?" asked Isabelle. "Sometimes," Burnmaster replied as he flicked the penknife into its case and returned it to the back pocket of his khaki shorts. "But I never get parcels that are postmarked Kathmandu, Nepal, like this one is." Burnmaster tipped the parcel's contents into the palm of his hand. 2 folded pieces of paper came first, followed by a small white object about the size of the end of his thumb. Pocketing the empty parcel, he held the white object up to examine it in the afternoon sunlight. He turned it slowly between his index finger and thumb, inspecting it from all angles. It was a tooth, a molar from the look of it, one of the teeth from the back of the mouth. Too big to be a human tooth, but from one of the larger primates perhaps. As he examined it, he realized it wasn't a real tooth. The color and texture were all wrong, but he suspected its maker wasn't trying to fool anyone. Burnmaster had made enough plaster models of teeth and bones in his life to be tricked by anything so simple. It was difficult to be sure, but the tooth looked more like a highly detailed replica that a scientist would make to assist in the study of the real thing. He noted the wear marks on one side and the chip on the other, the usual signs of dental aging. If this really was a faithful replica, then the real tooth, wherever it was, must have come from a creature that had been using it for some time. But just what kind of creature that was, Burnmaster wasn't sure. He had considerable experience as a zoologist, but this tooth didn't match anything he'd ever seen. Isabelle was looking on with interest. It was none of her business, but that never stopped her. "Ewa," she said. "Somebody sent you a tooth?" Burnmaster remained silent for a time, as if deep in thought. After a few moments, he gave her a friendly smile and replied, "So it seems, but don't worry, it's not a real tooth. You can tell by the texture." He handed it to her and she held it carefully. "See," he said, "the sides feel just a little bit rough, not like tooth enamel which is very smooth like glass. It's a well-made replica of what I presume is a real tooth. It's not a human tooth, is it?" she remarked. "It looks too big to be a human tooth. No, it's not human, Burnmaster replied. It looks like it could be from a primate, but his voice trailed off. It doesn't look like any primate tooth that I've ever seen. Happy that she wasn't holding a piece of somebody's mouth, even if it was just a replica, Isabelle inspected the tooth more closely with Laheeti and Twig looking on. Burnmaster unfolded the two pieces of paper that accompanied the tooth and glanced at each in turn. One was a news article titled Yeti Tooth Found by British Scientist in Himalayas. His eyebrows rose a little when he saw the name Nicky Zipster, and he read the article quickly, taking mental note of the important details. With a thoughtful expression on his face, he turned his attention to the other piece of paper. It was a letter neatly handwritten on lined paper with blue ink. In this era of emails and word processors, it was a nice personal touch. He glanced at the bottom of the letter. It read, "Yours sincerely, Nicky." Not sure why Nicky Zipster would be writing to him after all these years, and intrigued by the news article about the discovery she made in Nepal, he started at the top of the letter. "Dear Tom, I imagine the last thing you are expecting is to receive a letter from me after all this time. As I think about it, I realize that 10 years have passed since we last saw each other at Cambridge University. Even now, I look back on our time together as some of the happiest years of my life, and I am very sorry for not having kept in touch with you since then. I tracked you down through our mutual friends at Cambridge. I hope you are well and happy at your tropical zoo on Vavu. I am well, and presently living in Nepal, where I have taken a position as adjunct professor at Kathmandu University. I am enjoying it, and it gives me lots of time to continue my research. I have been living in Nepal for the past 2 years and have grown quite attached to the country and its people. And in case you are wondering, no, after Cambridge I never married, I just never seemed to find the time. You must be wondering why I am writing to you. If you haven't read the news article in the parcel, please do so now. I confirm that the information in the article is accurate. The tooth I included with this letter is an exact replica of the tooth I found in the Himalayas. It's a yeti tooth, Tom. I saw the creature with my own eyes and retrieved its tooth after it had moved away. I have the real tooth stored in a safe place in Kathmandu. I won't go into detail here about what the yeti was like. But suffice to say that I saw the creature with my own eyes, and I now believe without a shadow of a doubt that yeti are real. The news article explains some of what I saw and heard, but I can tell you a lot more. And that brings me to the purpose of this letter, Tom. I want you to come to Nepal and help me capture a yeti. If there is one yeti living in the mountains, there must be more, possibly lots more. Wouldn't it be marvelous if we discovered a new species of primate living in the Himalayas? We would have a subject of research to last us for the rest of our lives, and our places in the annals of science would be assured. The possibilities are endless. I know that we haven't seen each other for a long time, and this letter must come as a complete surprise. But of everybody I know, you are the best man for this job. You've got the qualifications and the field experience to pull this off. I can't imagine going into the Himalayas in search of yeti with anybody else. Please think about it, Tom, but don't think for too long. I am worried that the news article will bring a flood of adventurers to Nepal, all with similar plans to my own. After all, it's no secret that finding the yeti would be the greatest discovery of the century. I look forward to hearing from you, Tom, whatever your reply. Yours sincerely, Nicky. P.S. Have you been invited to dinner with the royal family of Vavu yet? After Burnmaster finished reading the letter, he refolded it with slow, pensive movements and slipped it and the news article into his khaki shirt pocket. Isabelle was watching him carefully. So does the letter explain the fake tooth? She asked. It certainly does, answered Burnmaster. Apparently it's a yeti tooth. That was the last thing she was expecting to hear. A what? She exclaimed. Burnmaster looked at her with an amused expression. You've heard of the yeti, haven't you? He asked. By this time, Twig had managed to get his hands on the tooth and was in the process of examining it closely. You mean the abominable snowman, right? He ventured. A race of half-human, half-apes that are supposed to be living in the Himalayas. Not to be outdone, Isabelle added, Mount Everest is in the Himalayas, isn't it? Right on both counts, replied Burnmaster. The Himalayas contains the highest mountain ranges in the world. European explorers have been returning from those mountains with stories about large hairy ape-like creatures for a long time. The creatures are usually seen from a long distance away, alone but sometimes in groups. Nobody's ever gotten close to one, and nobody's ever managed to get their camera out in time to get a good photograph. The only evidence to back up the claimed sightings are a few blurry photos of dark bipedal creatures standing on a distant white mountainside. There are also a number of photographs of yeti footprints from all different areas of the Himalayas, including on Mount Everest. But the expeditions to find a yeti have all returned empty-handed. These days, most people think the yeti is just a myth created by the locals who live near the Himalayas, or a hallucination caused by the low oxygen levels of that elevation. Isabelle, Laheeti and Twig weren't at all interested in the animals in the zoo anymore. Listening to Burnmaster's story with rapt attention, they imagined what it would be like to come face to face with a gorilla-like creature in the mountains. "But now somebody you know has found a yeti tooth?" asked Twig. Burnmaster nodded. "If it turns out to be real, it could change everything." "What are you going to do?" asked Isabelle. "Well," he began, "the person who wrote me this letter wants me to come to Nepal and help her capture a yeti. She claims to have seen one close-up and that the tooth is evidence that they exist." It sounded like a fantastic adventure. "Awesome," Laheeti and Twig exclaimed together. "So are you going to go?" He shrugged. "I haven't decided yet." "Who wrote you the letter?" Isabelle asked sweetly, knowing it was none of her business. "A lady named Nikki Zipster," he replied absently. "She's a professor now and works at Kathmandu University in Nepal." "Is she your girlfriend?" inquired Isabelle. Laheeti rolled his eyes. "How could she be Tom's girlfriend? Nepal is on the other side of the world." "Don't you even know where it is?" "I do so know where it is," Isabelle snapped back. "And haven't you ever heard of long-distance relationships?" "Okay, so where is Nepal then?" Laheeti countered. "It's near China, of course," she retorted. "Everybody knows that." "No, it's not," Laheeti declared. "It's near India." "You're both right," Burnmaster said. "It's wedged between China and India, and no, Nikki is not my girlfriend." Isabelle looked at him thoughtfully. "But she used to be, right?" she pressed. Burnmaster laughed. "That's for me to know and for you not to know." Twig shook his head at Isabelle. "Don't you ever give up." Twig returned the replica tooth to Burnmaster, who stared at it absently as he spoke. "If Nikki really has found a yeti tooth, it will be the discovery of the decade," he explained. 20 years ago, we didn't have the technology to study it, but now we can map its genetic code. It would be worth going to Nepal just to see that. The more I think about it, the better it sounds." There was a long pause in which he appeared to make up his mind. "But I'll have to sort things out with the zoo and organize a visa to Nepal first, as well as the necessary climbing permits." Isabelle got the distinct impression that Burnmaster wanted to go to Nepal to see more than just the yeti tooth, but she kept those thoughts to herself. Her most pressing concern was how to convince Burnmaster to take her with him. She had never been to Nepal, but from what she'd heard, it sounded like a place of mystery and adventure. Even if she never left the main city of Kathmandu, there would be lots to see and do, and if she got the opportunity to climb the Himalayas, that would be even better. One glance at Laheeti and Twig, and she knew they were thinking exactly the same thing. The trio nodded at each other in agreement and then fixed their attention on the khaki-clad South African. "And don't forget that you need to arrange visas and climbing permits for us too," said Isabelle. Burnmaster frowned. "What?" "Why, because we're coming with you," she answered in a matter-of-fact tone. "To Nepal," he replied, sounding a little shocked. "I don't think so." He was shaking his head at the craziness of the suggestion. "That would be a bad idea." He started in the direction of the administration building at a fast pace. The 14-year-olds stayed with him every step of the way and upped the ante on their efforts to convince him to take them to Nepal. They were walking past the enclosures containing the small monkeys, but Isabelle didn't notice. "You need us," she said. "We can help you look for yeti." Burnmaster looked skeptical. "How?" he asked. "Because 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1, volunteered Laheeti. "So that means 6 pairs of eyes are way better than 1. "You're right," Burnmaster said brightly, and Isabelle thought for a moment that that was the end of the argument. But then he added, "That's why I'm going with Nikki and 4 Sherpas." "What's a Sherpa?" asked Laheeti. "A local Nepalese person who works as a mountain guide," answered Burnmaster. "So if you do find a yeti, the Sherpas might try and take all the credit," Isabelle suggested. "See, that's the great thing about us helping you, we can't steal the credit for finding a yeti because we're just kids." Burnmaster wasn't convinced. "I'm not worried about you stealing the credit," he explained. "I'm worried about you getting hurt. Nepal is no place for inexperienced climbers. You can get injured a dozen different ways in those mountains, and there's no hospital for hundreds of miles. A lot of climbers have been killed in the Himalayas, and I'm not talking about beginners. I mean really experienced men and women who were well equipped and knew what they were doing. One minute they're climbing a mountain and the next they're crushed by an avalanche, or falling down a deep crevasse, or dying of exposure because they got lost. If none of those things get you, there's always the wildlife. Bears, dogs, wolves, leopards, and tigers, and no bars between you and them like here at the zoo. Eulala left out yetis, said Gulbenkian helpfully. Isabelle glared up at him. Exactly, Burnmaster said, nodding in agreement. That's another way you can get killed in the Himalayas. Twig decided to try a different tack. You said Nikki Zipster is a doctor, he began. That means she can help us if we get hurt. I said Nikki is a professor, Burnmaster corrected. She studied molecular biology at Cambridge. She's not a medical doctor. Other than standard first aid, she probably knows no more about trauma medicine than I do. Anyway, first aid training isn't going to help you much if you're trapped under 10 tons of snow after an avalanche. Gulbenkian will be there to help us, said Laheeti. Burnmaster glanced up at the giant islander. With all due respect to Gulbenkian, I know he won the international sumo competition recently, but he's not going to be much use against an avalanche. To be honest, Gull stammered, I don't even lie like snow. Burnmaster had an answer to all of their arguments, and Isabelle felt the possibility of a trip to Nepal slipping away. But the chances of something bad happening, she started to say. He interrupted her. Look, I can see you've all got your hearts set on this, and I am sorry to disappoint you, he said. I really am, but it's just too dangerous. And I don't want to be responsible for you if you get hurt. They had arrived at a shaded pavilion in front of the administration building. Burnmaster stopped walking and faced the 14-year-olds. Now, he said, a little more gently. I'm going to give Nikki a call and I'll be back in a few minutes. He left them standing there in the shade with glum expressions on their faces. Kids, Burnmaster thought to himself, a little exasperated as he walked into the air-conditioned building. They spend too much time thinking about the adventure and not enough time thinking about the risks. He unlocked his office door and stepped inside. This was a room that saw about as much use as the unworn tuxedo hanging in Burnmaster's closet at home. It was a small, untidy place with a lot of dusty, framed photographs on the walls and a window overlooking the giraffe enclosure. In the distance, the yellow and brown necks of the giraffes protruded above the lush green foliage, swaying gracefully as they moved. The bookcases were packed with zoology textbooks and wildlife magazines, and what didn't fit onto the shelves was stacked in unsteady piles next to the large desk beneath the window. As Burnmaster sat down at the desk and switched on his computer, he wondered why Nikki's letter didn't include a phone number he could contact her on in Nepal. It was a strange omission given she had taken the time to write the letter and send the replica tooth. Loading up the internet, he found the Kathmandu University website and a contact number under the name Professor Nikki Zipster. But when he called, there was no answer, so he tried the number for the front desk of the Animal Sciences faculty. The lady who answered the phone spoke broken English, but Burnmaster was able to learn that Nikki had gone on a trek and wasn't expected back for several days. He hung up the phone wondering why Nikki had invited him to Nepal and then embarked on a trek without waiting for him. He decided it didn't really matter because she would be back by the time he arrived in Kathmandu. The next call he made was to inquire about a visa and climbing permits. When Burnmaster walked outside 10 minutes later, he looked as glum as the 14-year-olds. Looks like I'm not going to Nepal, not for at least a month anyway, he exclaimed in disbelief. That's how long it's going to take to sort out a visa and climbing permits. Apparently there's no embassy in Vavu, so I have to organize everything directly with Nepal. Isabelle watched the zoologist sit down dejectedly on one of the deck chairs. That's a long time to wait, she said. Damn right, he sighed. Another expedition will probably find the yeti while I'm sitting here waiting. Nobody spoke for a few moments. From somewhere in the distance came the growl of a tiger. Then Isabelle had a great idea about how to use the situation to her advantage. Leaning over, she whispered in Laheeti's ear for a moment, and when the young prince nodded in agreement, she turned back to Burnmaster. Isabelle sighed melodramatically. Seems like you have no option but to wait, and hope nobody else finds a yeti in the meantime, Laheeti said, which, as you say, is a distinct possibility, added Isabelle. Burnmaster raised his head from his hands and looked sharply at the 14-year-olds. Then he laughed and said, "Oh, I see. I said you couldn't go to Nepal, and now I can't go, so you figure it's my just desserts, right? Okay, rub it in if it makes you feel better." "Nothing so horrible," Isabelle said, shaking her head. "The way I see it, the situation presents us all with an opportunity." Burnmaster frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "Well, as you know," began Isabelle, "Laheeti is a prince, and it just so happens that he has met several members of the Nepalese government. Isn't that right, Laheeti? The Prince of Vavu nodded. It sure is, he replied. So it's quite possible, continued Isabelle, that he could speak to the Nepalese government and sort out your visa and climbing permit situation. Laheeti was picking up what Isabelle was putting down. And I would only ask for one little favor in return, he declared. Burnmaster had a pretty good idea what that favor was, but he waited for Isabelle to say it. Take us with you, she said obligingly. Burnmaster considered the possibilities and then said to Laheeti, assuming you can cut through the bureaucratic red tape, there's another problem. If the Nepalese government finds out that you're coming to Nepal to catch a yeti, it's bound to become public knowledge. That means crowds, photographers, and television crews everywhere we go. I don't mind getting my picture taken, but it's going to be hard to sneak up on a yeti with that sort of entourage following us. Laheeti thought for a moment. When I talk to the Nepalese government, I'll emphasize that we want to keep a low profile, he said. It was the right answer and it would probably work. There was no reason for the Nepalese government to publicize the fact that the Prince of Vavu was coming if the prince himself wanted to do so under the radar. Burnmaster was quiet for a while as he weighed up the pros and cons of the idea. He was still worried about being responsible for the 14-year-old's safety, but it was true that he would have Gulbenkian, Nikki, and several Sherpas to help him keep an eye on them. It wasn't a perfect scenario, but it sure beat the heck out of sitting here on his backside, waiting for someone else to make the zoological discovery of a lifetime. Burnmaster looked at each of the 14-year-olds in turn before letting his gaze settle on Laheeti. I can't believe I'm agreeing to this, but if you can get me to Nepal quickly and quietly, then I'll take you all with me, he declared. But when we're there, you have to do exactly as I say. I wasn't kidding when I said it's a dangerous place. Then his expression abruptly changed and he asked, what about the king? Will he let you go? The 14-year-olds were grinning from ear to ear, and there was no way a little detail like parental permission was going to stop this adventure. Isabelle and Twigger had already worked out how to sell it to their own fathers when Laheeti replied, you worry about how to catch a yeti, and I'll worry about the visas and my dad. 2 days later, when all the paperwork was taken care of, they were on their way to Nepal.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.